Welcome to Stroke Forward. My name is Marcia Moran. For the next 40 minutes or so, we are going to talk about things that stroke survivors, or any brain injury survivor, deals with. If you look at me today, you probably don't see a person who had a stroke, but I feel it. My body functions differently. Do I think I will get back to 100%? Yes, because to think differently is to admit defeat. We will talk to all sorts of people who have been there, from survivors to caretakers to doctors, nurses, therapists, friends, and family who have seen us at our weakest. They have cheered us with their victories, no matter how large or how small. How did we get here? That's what this show is going to tell you. Hannah Balberde is an occupational therapist at Encompass Health Rehabilitation of Northern Virginia. She has been an OT for 6 years and loves the rehab setting, especially the stroke population. Hannah went to James Madison University for her undergraduate degree in health sciences and also received her master's degree from JMU.
I'm delighted to introduce Hannah Balberde on the call today. How are you doing, Hannah?
I'm good, thanks. I'm glad to be doing this. I've never done this before, so it's really exciting.
Well, it's really exciting to have you here because I've known you for a long time, and I think that it's really special to have people that I actually know on the show. So thank you.
No, that's awesome. I'm glad that you asked me to do this. It's very exciting.
Okay. So I know that you're an occupational therapist at Encompass Health Rehabilitation because that's the place where I went for therapy. What made you decide to become an OT?
Yeah, so I knew I always wanted to be in healthcare. I didn't know really what I wanted to do. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a vet. I think every kid wants to be a vet. And then I ended up getting physical therapy for something. And so I was like, well, maybe I want to do physical therapy. And then I actually babysat for a family, and their daughter got occupational therapy at the home. So that's kind of how I got introduced to it. And at the time, I was babysat a lot. I was really into the pediatrics side of things. And I wanted to go to James Madison University for my undergrad, and they had an occupational therapy program. So I just kind of was like, I think this is just meant to be. So that's kind of how I got into occupational therapy. And I kind of went through my whole program thinking I'd work with pediatrics, and here I am. I've been working with adults for 7 years. So
Okay.
I love it. I love it.
How did you wind up at a place like Encompass Health?
So I had a rotation there. So the last 6 months of my master's program in occupational therapy, you do two rotations, two 12-week rotations. So my second one was at the time, HealthSouth, now Encompass Health. And I was there for 12 weeks. I just fell in love with the setting. So I really liked it. Graduated shortly after I finished the rotation, took my exam, and then they had a job opening. I actually applied for an on-call position because that's all they had. And the day of my interview, they said, well, we actually have a full-time opening if you want it. So I said, lay it on me. I'm ready to make money. So yeah, and then that's kind of how I got the job and been there ever since.
So what is getting therapies? Why is it so important to your patients?
Oh, it's so important. I mean, just in talking with a lot of my elderly patients about their parents, rehab used to not be a thing. I mean, people would get sick, they'd go to the hospitals, and they usually would go home or go to a nursing facility. So having a place like rehab is just so important. I mean, when you're in a hospital, acute care hospitals, in this area, such as, Fair Oaks or Fairfax Hospital, their job is to get you medically stable. They're not getting you up a ton. So depending on how severe your injury is or your stroke or whatnot, they can be in the bed for days, weeks, sometimes months, and then are expected to go back to their day to day. I mean, it's not possible. You need to do the therapy. So, I mean, a lot of the times when you're bedbound, your muscles atrophy, your brain atrophies, you can't go back and function. So it's important to have kind of that in-between place, like rehab, intensive rehab, to get stronger, both cognitively and physically, before you can go home. And there are therapies at home where you continue to work on those skills. It's just not as intense. So it's so important. I mean, like I said, when you're in the bed for They say if you're in the bed for 1 day, it takes 3 days to recoup from that, 3 to 4 days. So it's important to get back to your life. And that's what gives people motivation to continue on, is that they have things that they're doing that are meaningful in their day to day. So, and that's what therapy is for.
Yeah. So I have to say that at HealthSouth, I was really motivated. And I think it was because of the people around me were so helpful and giving and were rooting for me. And it is just, as a patient, it was really so needed for me, you know? So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's important to have that, especially right now with the pandemic. I mean, it's not so bad now, but when it comes to the visitation and things, but in the midst of the pandemic, there was no visitors. So
Mhm.
I could only imagine how a patient must feel being in a room surrounded by four walls, only surrounded by the people that work there, who they are essentially strangers, and they end up becoming the closest people they have because their families couldn't come in. It was really, really sad. And that having that support from, family, I think this whole pandemic showed how important it is to have a support system.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I think that's why I love this setting, because I work with people for, 90 minutes a day, and I really do get to know them. I'm sure you experience that with your therapist. You saw them for 3 hours every single day. You get really close with them. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So I know the thing that gave me my biggest struggle was aphasia. What do you think most people struggle with?
it's different for every person, especially when you're talking about the stroke population, right? I mean, depending on the location of the brain, it can, people can struggle like you with the speech side of it. People might be able to talk, people might be able to walk, but they can't swallow. They're on a feeding tube. It's not safe for them to eat food. Some people can think completely clearly and talk and, not move one side of their body, and that's their biggest barrier. But I would say between all of those things, between the eating, the cognitive abilities, and the physical, I think that the biggest thing that people struggle with is what's ahead, what to expect, giving up who they were and accepting that the future, it's going to be, it's going to be work, but seeing what their future holds for them. I think that's the hardest part about the whole thing.
So do you think people actually realize that life is going to be very different when they leave the rehab hospital? Or you think people are going, I'm just getting back to where I was before?
I think it depends. I mean, if, depending on the location of the stroke, it's so hard. I mean, people ask, family members, well, where are they going to be in 4 months? I don't know. Everybody's so
Yeah.
different. I think some people are very aware of what's happening to them, especially the younger ones that are, in their 40s or 50s, who are still working. And they're like, how
Mhm.
am I supposed to get back to work? And they understand. But then you have some people where, certain parts of their brain were affected, where they don't have that reasoning or the understanding of what's happening, no
Mhm.
awareness. They think they can go home and live by themselves. And no matter how much I try to say, okay, if you're going to go home by yourself, you need to show me you can do X, Y, and Z, and they can't do it. And they still don't realize that going home is just not an option. So I think it's probably the hardest for the people who are understanding of what's happening.
Okay.
So
That's funny because I thought I'd be back to my old self by the first year.
yeah,
Then I
yeah.
go,
It's and it depends. It depends on what the injury is, and
yeah.
I think sometimes the physical side is harder for people to get past, and the communication. I
Yeah.
think those are the hardest things.
Yeah.
But I think it also depends on, what your life was before. I mean, some
Mhm.
people before don't do anything, and so to go home and have difficulties doing the things that they were already having difficulty before, it might not be that big of a change. So I think it just kind of depends on who they were before, what they were doing, how independent they were. But I find that's the most common struggle, me trying to sit down and talk through with them what it's going to look like, and just trying to be realistic almost, and
Mhm.
practical.
Okay.
Um,
Tell me about an experience where you had a patient that just wowed you. It could be how fast they made progress. It could be how far they went. It could be anything.
Yeah, so there's probably a couple examples of that. And I've worked with so many stroke patients and I just love the population so much. So my go-to, I love doing electrical stimulation on patients. So what that means if somebody, I particularly work on the upper extremity, so the shoulder, the bicep, the wrist, the hand, uh, and trying to throw on electrical stimulation, get their hand to move. And I've seen so many times when I do that, every single day, I'll walk in one morning and they can all of a sudden move their arm. And I think that's just the coolest thing ever, just to show that, something that I've been doing with them is working. I feel like that's the biggest way for patients to see that they're improving. I don't know, probably because it's maybe the most measurable in their minds. Maybe measurable is not the right word. Like they actually see the progress. So, if somebody can sit on the edge of bed better 1 week from when they got there from the previous week, they don't see that. They don't remember what they did a week ago, but they remember that their arm didn't work yesterday. Now it's working today. So that's always just the coolest thing, just to see when the muscles start moving again and all that. And, I think the other thing that really wows me, part of my job is working with people on their self-care, things that we take advantage of on a day-to-day that we can do and have no problems doing. Standing at the sink to brush your teeth, or feeding yourself, or taking a shower, and then they can't do that. And I find so much joy in getting people out of the bed, brushing out their matted hair, getting them in the shower, lathering up with conditioner. And when I have patients that it's maybe not safe to get them in the first day or the first week, and when I can finally get them in the shower, it's such an accomplishment, because it's not just taking a shower, it's being able to tolerate the activity, it's being able to sit upright, it's being able to participate in the activity and stay alert, all these different things that go into it. And so I've had a couple patients I can think of that it was a process. It took me 90 minutes to get this whole thing done. But we did it and they feel so much better. And it's just, like I said, it's not just the act of taking the shower. It's all the things that go into it and all the work that goes into it on the patient's end. So those are probably like my best example. It's not super specific, but I've had a couple of people where it's, people thought it could never happen and we got it done. So, and then also, the people where when they first get there, I'm like, there's no way they can be taken care of at home. There's no way. And then something happens or something clicks and they end up going home, and they do need a little help, but they can go home and it's safe. And so that's always really, really rewarding.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So tell me about neuroplasticity. What is it?
Yeah. So neuroplasticity, it's a really cool thing that your brain can do it. Essentially rewiring your brain. So if you lose the ability, and I feel like I keep talking about the arm, it's just what my focus
That's
is. But
okay.
if you can't if you can't move your arm, because of wherever your stroke was, the brain connection's essentially cut off. So neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to rewire itself to get a connection back down to that arm so you can move it again. I try to explain it to people like, if there's construction on a road, they don't just shut the road down. You got to turn around and go back to where you came from. They figure out another way to reroute the traffic to get from point A to point B. So I try to explain it that way, your brain's ability to reform itself and rewire itself to get back the functions that it was able to do prior.
Okay. So how frequently does someone have to move, we'll say their arm, before neuroplasticity takes effect? Is it right away? I don't really know. Tell me.
It's it's different for every person. Some people, it's like the worst answer ever, but I'm telling you, sometimes I, have patients where I'll read their charts and at the hospital they had nothing.
Right.
No movement on one side of their body. And then I go in to see them, I'm expecting for them to have nothing on one side and they're moving it. And so I asked them, I'm like, well, do you know when this happened? And they're like, I literally woke up and could move my arm and my leg. Instant. I have some people that I'll work with them for a week and a half, and then it'll happen then after I do some stimulation, kind of wake up the muscles a little bit. And then I have others where it doesn't kick in like other people. And I will say a lot of neuroplasticity is the attentiveness to whatever it is you're trying to do or whatever function you're trying to get back. So some people, the people I was talking about earlier who just aren't aware of their deficits. Some people just aren't aware that one side of their body does not work. Those are the ones where it's a lot harder because they don't recognize that they have one side of their body. They don't recognize that it's weak on that side. And these are the people that you'll see sitting and their arms hanging down and their legs kicked out. There's just no awareness. And when there's no awareness of what you need to improve, your brain's not going to recognize it. So those types of strokes where there's not that awareness, it's a lot harder to see that neuroplasticity kick in, essentially.
Okay.
That's why they say it's so important to stay engaged in whatever you're doing. And if the patient can't do it themselves, it's important that family comes in and tries to engage the patient. For you, for example, somebody who has aphasia, talking with them and getting that repetition in, and that's what you have to do to try to get that neuroplasticity kick in.
Yep. So I'm a patient that doesn't think neuroplasticity is real. Is there anything? And that's not true. I think neuroplasticity is.
No, I
real.
know. I've never seen it. I'm kidding.
Yeah. So I believe that neuroplasticity is not real. How do you change my mind?
Yeah, so I have to change a lot of people's mind by proving it.
Okay.
And sometimes I can't do it. Sometimes there is just no getting through to the person. They don't believe me. But once again, these are usually the people that don't think anything's wrong. So I feel like my biggest thing that I do is the stimulation that I do. I mean, when I put that stimulation on and even though they're not actively doing it, the machine will open and close their hand, or I'll have pads here and will raise their shoulder. So even though they know or have some sort of knowledge that the machine's doing the work, their brain, they're still thinking like, wow, my shoulder is moving, or wow, my hand's moving. And that in and of itself is neuroplasticity in the making. So when I do that over and over again, and then eventually they can shrug their shoulder a little bit, I'll say, see, that's because we did this and your brain's rewiring itself and now it can do it. So I can explain it all day long, but some people, they just need to see it. So that's kind of the best way I try to do it.
Okay. Interesting.
But not everybody is appropriate for STEM. Some people who, if they have active cancer or history of cancer or a pacemaker or things like that, we can't do it. And it's such a shame, but there's lots of other things that we do to try to wake up those muscles, vibration or, weight bearing or, things like that.
So that's interesting. I didn't get any stimulation. How long ago did you start it?
Oh, that's a good question. I know we've had it since I've been there. So it's been 7 years. I feel like when I was starting, I don't think a ton of people knew. I think there's maybe a couple therapists that knew how to use it.
Okay.
But it also depends. I mean, if somebody can already move their arm, for example, or move their leg, it's almost more beneficial to have them actively try to do it themselves. So I don't know, did you have, I know you, because I read your book, I remember yours was more like your fine motor coordination type deficits, right? Yeah. So usually, at least for me and my approach, if somebody can already kind of move their arm or their leg, I'd prefer to do something more functional. Like, okay, let's try to cut your food, or let's try to fill a glass with water, or let's try to, one of the things I like to work on is having people fill a measuring cup with water and then pouring it out, and just kind of that pouring pattern. So sometimes doing things more functional is a little bit more relatable for people too.
Okay.
But I don't know, and this is actually new for my hospital, Marshall. I don't think I told you that we have this, but we now have, and I forgot what it's called, and I should have looked it up. My speech therapy friends would kill me, but they have stim now for the throat muscles.
Really?
So they use the stim. What is it called? It's going to drive me nuts. They use the stim on the throat muscles to try to wake those up so that people can start swallowing food.
I wonder if they'd be interested in the AASIS microcurrent neurofeedback machine as well, because that stimulates the brain. So
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, it is really interesting. The technology is wild. So they'll have people actively eating with the stim to try to get them to engage those muscles to swallow food fully. So it's really cool.
Okay, so we need to talk at some point.
We do. I know. They're gonna be so mad at me. But I'll think of it and I'll let you know what it is.
Okay. So tell me about how caregivers fit into the whole piece.
Oh yeah, they're so crucial. It's hard because at least in my setting in rehab, we don't have a lot of time. So we try to pull the caregivers in ASAP, even if it's just to observe and see what's going on. Um, the patients eventually leave and hopefully go home, and it does fall on the caregivers. And I think having a caregiver that's very involved, um, and motivating and kind of like an accountability partner almost is really, really important. Not having family makes a bigger impact on people that, or caregivers makes a bigger impact on people than I think what we all realize. If you're going through something alone, it's a lot harder. And the caregiver is super, super important. Now, I think on the flip side, they also need to take care of themselves. And so when I do training with caregivers, I try to pull them aside away from the patient and say, they are going to need help with X, Y, and Z, but you also need to be able to excuse yourself and take care of you, because you can't be a good caregiver or motivator for your loved one if you don't take care of yourself. And, I think that's easier said than done. And I mean, especially now that I'm a mom, and I have 2 kids, it's, I have to remind myself too, if I want to be a good mom, I need to also take care of myself. It's the same thing with caregivers. Caregiver burnout is real. And, but, I think that's kind of one of the values in our hospital and in the rehab therapy department is we're trying to show patients how to do things for themselves. And I think sometimes what happens, and I get it, life happens, people go home, and the caregivers will just kind of do everything for them because you're in a rush, you have places to go, you have things to do, and you're taking on the jobs of 2 people sometimes instead of just one, or 2 people, and it's just you now. But then it just puts more on the caregiver to do more for the person. So really trying to educate the family that, if they're sitting in their chair at home, they can brush their teeth, they can put on a shirt, they can feed themselves. Don't feel like you need to do those things for them. It's just when they're up and they're standing, you just need to be right there. Other than that, let them figure it out. And but the caregivers are so important. It's kind of going back to what I was saying earlier with the COVID stuff, that visitation was impacted. There was no family allowed, no friends, no family were allowed to come visit. And it was, you could tell the changes in, not only were they dealing with a global pandemic before, but now they're dealing with this life-changing stroke, and it makes such a difference.
I couldn't even think about what it would be like because my husband was my caretaker and he was there every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
Makes such a difference. It really does. And especially when you're looking at, we only see people for, anywhere between 7 and 14 days, but you tack on the time before that at the hospital and then with us. And then if they go somewhere else and just feeling like you're so alone, it could totally lead to anxiety or depression or, anything like that. So it's really, really important.
Yeah. So does diet play a role in how people think and act as well?
In regards to like after a stroke or
Yeah.
before? After a stroke?
Actually, you could say anything. It can be before or after because I actually think diet is important.
Yeah.
But shh, I want to hear what you have to say.
No, I agree. I think diet is extremely important. I mean, obviously, I say obviously, a lot of people don't know. Poor diet can lead to a stroke. I will say, I guess, when I'm thinking about the rehab setting, when patients come in and whether they're on a feeding tube or they're on a pureed, thickened liquid diet, that's disgusting. They don't want to eat. I don't blame them. I've tried those foods. They're not good, but unfortunately it's a safety issue, right? Like they can't eat toast or, chew an English muffin or eat salad. Everything's pureed. So those people, we try everything we can to get them to eat something that they enjoy, whether it's, applesauce or, something that's already pureed that maybe they ate before, a smoothie that's thickened. Because what you'll find is people who don't eat, they don't have energy. They don't want to get out of bed. They can't maintain alertness. They're losing weight. And when all these things happen, their body's not able to function. So the diet is huge. And that's why our speech therapists are amazing, because they're the ones that are trying to figure out the foods that they'll eat, upgrade their diet so they can't eat again. I had a patient who's actually a part of our stroke support group, and he was on a feeding tube he was with us. I left out of the country midway through his stay, but when I was with him for the first maybe week, he was on a feeding tube and he was delirious. He was out of it. He was confused, unsafe. And his speech therapist really tried very, very hard to get him to eat foods, got him to eat foods. It was safe. Completely different person.
Yep.
Completely with it, had energy. You know, he would sleep all day long. He didn't sleep as much anymore. He had energy. He was recovering faster. All of his brain functions were starting to come back. I mean, I feel like food is very, you know, what's the word I'm trying to say? Not undermined, but it doesn't get enough credit of how big of an impact diet can play, you know, on recovery. So,
Yep.
I don't know if that answers your question.
You did.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the stroke group, and you are in charge of our stroke group.
Yeah.
So what did you get from that?
I love the stroke support groups. I've been running it since November 2016, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a while. I think there's two things I love about it. The one thing I love is, you know, I'll tell all of my stroke patients about the support group.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody joins it, right? You know, we have a decent, you know, we usually have between like 15-ish people that join, 15 to 18 people that join every month. When I get that person who joins, who I haven't heard from or seen in 3 to 6 months, and they join the group, and seeing where they're at is so rewarding. So a lot of the times these patients leave, I don't hear from them. They have my card, they have my email, they have my number, and I don't know where they're at. You know, I have current patients who say, hey, like, you know, how do people typically recover? It's hard for me to answer unless they join the support group, because I don't know, I don't hear from them. So I think it's so cool seeing where they're at. And, you know, somebody's saying, you know, oh, like I'm back at work now, or, oh, I'm driving again, or, oh, I don't need my walker anymore. My arm moves again. And I think that's just the coolest thing ever in the world. And I will say, you know, now that it's virtual, before when it was in person, I think it was cool for even our staff to see somebody walking in and they recognize, and they're like, you're walking in here, you know, and just seeing how they've progressed in that way. So I love that. And I think even more, I love when somebody's having a hard time, they're not coping well, they're getting emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing other people providing support, you know, and just kind of sitting back and watching that. You know, I can give support all day long, but I've never had a stroke. I don't know what it's like. So hearing other stroke survivors, you know, giving support to someone else is just, it just reaffirms why I do the support group. You know, it's very, very rewarding, and making sure people know that they're not alone, and just being a resource for them. And so it's very, very rewarding.
Yep. So what question didn't I ask you that maybe I should have?
I don't know. I feel like you asked a lot of good ones.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. So then how do people get in touch with you?
Email's probably the best way. I'm on, I'm not full-time anymore, but I'm typically on my work email 5 times a week. So I'm usually always on there. I'm pretty quick to respond. So email is probably the best way.
Okay.
I'm more than Jimmy to say it. But it is. Or you can post it.
I'll just post it.
Yeah, email is probably the best way, for sure.
Okay. So thank you for taking the time to talk today, Hannah. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Oh, thanks for asking me to do this. This was a lot of fun. It's fun talking with you. And I will say, Marcia, I have to say, it's been really cool to even see you, you know, just part of the support group, seeing you and hearing all of the accomplishments you've had, you know, since having your stroke, with writing your book and starting a podcast, and, you know, all of your input on the Toastmasters, and just all of the resources you have in the community. And it's just, you're always my go-to. And, you know, you gave me the 12 tips to stroke recovery. All of my therapists have that at the hospital, and we give that to a lot of our stroke patients. And you're very valued by me as a therapist. So I appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Stroke Forward Podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like it on Facebook, LinkedIn, or anywhere else you heard it. If you want a copy of Just Say Yes to Life, please order it from Amazon.com. The proceeds go to Stroke Awareness Oregon, an amazing nonprofit that educates about stroke causes, prevention, and treatment options. The book, Stroke Forward, is also available on Amazon.com.